Good morning, everyone, and welcome once again, and welcome to this session. It's with a great pleasure that I'm introducing our first keynote speaker. Pedro Rebelo is a composer, is a sound artist, is someone whose trajectory starting from music and an approximation with sound and architecture, it goes way beyond any traditional trajectories, gathering a lot of different projects that combine music with sound and with a really great sense of society and community, and several projects actually, that really shape the idea that music and sound and the role of the composer and the sound artist can be something really broad and interventive, which is, I believe, we will see in Pedro's presentation. And well, to the formal, Pedro is a professor at Sonic Arts Research Centre in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and both in academic and artistic trajectories. Some of the most interesting projects and mindsets, I would say, that I know come from there, or some of the projects I've known that are really influenced by this mindset and this approach in a broad sense to how music and sound can relate and be explored in the really broad sense. Well, I'll leave you with Pedro Rebelo.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to Rui for the very kind words. Thank you for EIMAD, organizing committee, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. As has been mentioned before, it's great to be back into kind of real conferences, so to speak. So I particularly thank you for that. I also thank you for in my kind of thinking, the timeliness of the invitation, both in the context of the New Bauhaus initiative, in the context of the scope for this conference. And I decided to entitle this Undisciplining Sound and Music, thinking through the listening experience. And I've got a bit of a roller coaster to go through, so I hope you bear with me. And the reason why this notion of undisciplining kind of came about for me is, as Rui said, I'm a professor at the Sonic Arts Research Centre, which was established nearly 20 years ago as a researcher in sonic arts, and I have now taken on the role of broadening that scope of research to a wider remit of sound and music, which is a highly kind of interdisciplinary practice and research agenda, which includes colleagues from directly involved in sound and music, as you would expect, but also from psychology, anthropology, architects, urban planners, and so on. So thinking about discipline and undisciplining and interdisciplinary work has been kind of on my kind of everyday thinking. So we've got some text to organize before I say any more. So bear with, please. So the notion of discipline in an academic sense and disciplinary definition is arguably one of the great contributions of Western thought since, I guess, the Enlightenment, maybe before. And for all the benefits associated with the notion of discipline in promoting a sense of focus, a sense of knowledge tradition that builds over generations, a sense of community of practice, I think we have for some time now, perhaps since the second half of the 20th century, we have come to become familiar with some of its shortcomings. The notion of discipline promotes and develops itself more than it develops others. It looks into its own knowledge and practices more than it does to others. And this conference is clearly a platform for looking sideways and unfolding paths across the so-called disciplines of music, arts, and design. In doing so, in the context of the new European Bauhaus ambitions for, quote, building together a sustainable and inclusive future that is beautiful for our eyes, minds, and souls, and I hope for our ears as well, in creating spaces and experiences that are enriching, sustainable, and inclusive. So I decided to address this through an arguably reductive, but hopefully not overly disciplinary stance. The term sound and music has, over the last 10 years, depending on which kind of region of the world you're thinking of, it's been emerging as a way of bridging a really deeply carved disciplinary gap between conceptions of what is accepted as music at any given point in time and place. The term sound and music suggests a broadening and expansion of our listening versus a more intuitive disciplinary narrowing, which in music manifests itself in a plethora of sub-disciplines, and we tend to separate composition from improvisation, performance from musicology, analysis from ethnomusicology, music anthropology, and so on, all have their disciplinary divides. In the world of musical genres that most of us deal with on a daily basis, just taking hip-hop for an example, we split it into boom bap, trap, mumble rap, rap rock, country rap, gangster rap, melodic rap, crunk, drill, grime, bounce, footwork. That's just an example. If we go back, I guess, a couple hundred years, some of you will kind of recognize this more than others, depending on of your age. So as much as we can celebrate and access these habits of categorization, there are some difficulties. They're so embedded and widespread in our educational systems, cultural agencies, and technology to the extent that sometimes they feel transparent. So for those of us growing before the internet was established, library organization was a bliss. From little cards on cabinets to the first computer terminals, there was a system making it all work. One used to refer to the duodecimal classification system, numbers, and a particular subdivision or subsection or division, as they were called, almost affectionately. We're going to check 786.9 IL to see what's new in the category of drums and devices used for percussive effects. However convenient categorization systems may be, they introduce a particular knowledge model from the very outset, tending towards exclusion rather than inclusion. In the Dewey system, first published in 1876, music as a discipline quite rightly has its own classification and divisions. However, sound does not quite appear in the same domain, and it does appear under science, physics, 530, and then 534, sound and other and related vibrations. So let's talk about the common ground, going back to this idea of sound and music. Sound as a modality, sound as our hearing sensory apparatus, and music as, I guess, an artistic endeavor with oral manifestation. Now, needless to say that music has manifestations other than sound, and it is often that music cultures develop a sense of themselves without necessarily relying on access to the oral. Musicology, musical criticism, technical writing on music or musical instruments. On the other hand, sound has manifestations which are overtly not music. The classic counter term to music is not sound, is normally noise, isn't it? So noise, not unlike music, is a rich term, but problematic as well. Noise, as in noise abatement, so the study of the effects of mechanical noise often and the implementation of measures to ameliorate the situation due to harmful consequences for humans and other animals. Noise as in Japanoise, the Japanese subgenre of music that's become known worldwide for its vigor and unique aesthetics and technical inventiveness. Noise as in the Futurist Manifesto by Luigi Russolo in 1913 incites us to embrace the noisiness of the soundscape of the urban city in the early 20th century. And noise in what we normally attach to my neighbors are very noisy, right? So apart from the clear-cut distinctions such as implied by my neighbors are very noisy, and by extension, I am not noisy, there's a fascination property of noise in its slippery nature. Given its provocative, disturbed, and disturbant qualities, noise implicates a relationship. Noise by whom, and noise from what? A world devoid of noise is as difficult to imagine as arguably unwanted. One only needs to reflect on the extent of the music industry's obsession with the warmth sound of the vinyl, analog tape, or cassette, leading to an introduction of what might otherwise be called noise into the system to make it warmer. With noise comes the notion of the used, the worn, the real, and hence the human. Noise is quirky, and it is at times an assault on our ears, but also an invitation to listen closely. Looking again at the divide between noise and music, perhaps one of the most accepted divisions in the arts of sound. How many parents endure with screeching sounds of their young child playing the violin? Perhaps not calling it noise, perhaps in their minds something that is becoming music. Now, if they listen to their child's screeching noises, then they are noises, they are not becoming music. They're somebody else's noise. So I find this idea of the not yet music an intriguing concept from an artistic perspective. The not yet lets us accept that things take time and they are not a certain way just because we want them to be. The no longer is equally fascinating. The no longer needed are residues of something or activity deemed more important and of more value than what remains. The no longer is filled with creative potential. We only need to think of the culinary traditions around the world that have developed unique dishes out of leftovers, of something that was of primary importance and then gets reframed and remade into something else that then gains its own importance. With the notion of the no longer comes the intuitive and dignified intent to not waste. The state of becoming, the no longer is forever wanting its moment of not yet, and hence the cycle continues sustainably. So I'd like to start sharing some excerpts from projects that articulate some of these ideas in practice. I had a long time fascination with musical instruments that are no longer, that were somehow left behind. And I had the opportunity of exploring this in a project some years ago in a piece called Gathering Dust, commissioned by Musa Music Portugal for the Sound Art Electric Ensemble. I began the entire thing by asking each member of the ensemble to find an instrument that they had some connection with, but was left over. It was abandoned. This picture is an example of the piano that featured in the piece that was in a kind of a old church that served as a, as you can see, kind of warehouse for all kinds of weird things. So I'd like to play you, so the piece explored this idea of, you know, what are these instruments, what are the identities of these instruments, and what's the relationship between the performer and the instrument. So I asked them to play the instrument, and I situated the sound world of these instruments that were broken in different ways. This is the kind of the discovering the cello section. So a couple of minutes video that shows that, hopefully. So perhaps a transition, excuse me, there from the not yet music that so many of us are familiar with. The sound and music terrain is filled with many other characteristics that enrich, disrupt, and connect, as well as break apart. So many of the lines that might mark this terrain are disciplinary lines that bend and extend at times. With all its faults and irregularities, let's take sound and music terrain as a space in which we can develop, understand, and play with our own listening. At this point, it is important to release some of these terms from their intuitively aural domain. In a multimodal or cross-modal understanding of experience, the separation of the senses is in itself problematic. Cross-modal sensory experiences, although not only relatively recently being studied by psychologists and cognitive scientists, are part of our everyday lives. One only needs to think of our, childhood memories of our home and its smells and touch and sounds and sights that all kind of intermingle to form a memory experience. Charles Spence at Oxford, his work on cross-modality is helping us better understand how sound, in particular, can influence numerous sensations, including taste. Sonic qualifiers such as crispy and crunchy are at the center of segments of the food industry. And great care is given to how certain foods sound, including their packaging. The opening of a package of crisp already puts you in a crispy kind of state of mind. Charles Spence showed that without sound, i.e. putting people in the lab eating crisps with earmuffs without hearing the sound, substantially reduces the sensation of crispiness. In my work with one of Spence's associates, Professor Barry Smith, we explored a unique, fascinating food sensation, and we look at the tactile and sonic potential of that. And this is an amazing ingredient called Sichuan pepper, which is prime ingredient in the Sichuan region in China. We ask how sound can modulate a specific tasting experience through temporal framing and association. The sound piece that was created to accompany the eating, crunching of these peppercorns follows a number of sensations of what happens when we kind of crunch these little things. It starts with a crunchiness sensation, then it spreads, there's a mouthfeel full of citrusy flavor across the mouth. Then it follows, or it ends with a throbbing sensation in the lips and the mouth. And this is caused by a bioactive component called hydroxyl asansol. And it turns out through Barry's work that who's measured this, that this sensation happens between 48 and 50 hertz. So it's in the audio domain, if you like. And that's your tongue and lips kind of throbbing after eating some of this. Now, I didn't bring any for you to try, but I would like to play you a little bit of the sound piece that kind of goes with that, if that's playing. So taste and I guess taste, sensations, and listening have something interesting in common. They're so highly individual. We can talk at length of what a particular wine tastes like, or a particular ingredient, or a particular piece of music means to me. There's something highly individual. This part of this work attempts to try and get a sense of shared experience. What happens to a group of 40 people in a room, if they're eating the same thing and listening to the same thing, is there an alignment in particular sensations, which we found when we kind of gets to this throbbing stage, that by listening to this at the same time as experiencing the taste, there was a sense of kind of shared, kind of arrived at this moment, if you like. So as part of our body, not only our ears vibrate with sound impulses, this is an example in which there's acoustic energy coming from a loudspeaker or headphones, and in this case our lips and tongues are kind of vibrating at the same rate, which is interesting in itself. Okay, continuing on this notion of undisciplining sound and music, we turn to the Anthropocene condition we live with, and its associated crises and challenges. The 2015 Humanities for the Environment Manifesto for Research and Action urges society to employ multiple, even contradictory perspectives to tackle those challenges, arguing that we must find an alternative understanding that exceeds disciplinary thinking and goes well beyond the idea that knowledge, for a start, only happens in rooms like this and in the academy. Experimental sound art has for some years created a space of dialogue for an artistic engagement with environmental issues through sound and listening. Artist Anea Lockwood has perhaps been one of the pioneers of this work. She started creating river sound maps since the 1960s, a type of listening, recording, and composition engagement with the soundscape along rivers such as the Hudson or the Danube that arguably provides a unique type of access to these ecosystems. A lot has changed since Lockwood's first sonic river ventures, and we see this type of work moving away, not away, but moving to domains that are broader from a purely artistic activity to something that is of note and of interest to, for example, environmental scientists. I had the pleasure of being invited to do a river project, a river in Portugal, not too far from here, capturing aspects of this river over its 200 kilometers length was a process of engaging sonically with aspects of the river, but also talking to communities that inhabit the river and live off the river. The work aimed to highlight the increased residue problem resulting from the various human activities along the river. The installation covered the gallery floor with materials from the river. On one side, branches, bark, wood. On another side, sand, over there. And in the middle, plastic residues found in the river that were shredded and were lit up. The shape that you see there is the course of the river. The audience was invited to step into the gallery, and by doing so, immediately causing their presence to be felt materially by shifting the materials and audibly by making a sound. The work also invited audience members to employ a type of listening that tries to derive information from the sounds that we hear. Some of this ability we have lost over generations, but we all grew up with the ability of knowing, for example, in this audio example, more or less where in the dawn chorus we are. Is it 4 in the morning? Is it 6 in the morning? Is it sunrise? Judged by the species of animals and birds that we can hear. This is sometimes called causal listening. Michel Chion, following Pierre Schaeffer, theorized this, and it focused on deriving information from sound. Information about its source, the forces that are at play, and the materials that are involved in causing a particular sound. From an evolutionary point of view, we have become rather good at this, although, of course, we all know we can be easily tricked if we look at the art of Foley and sound effects in the cinema, in which a sound can be made, a sound of a punch can be made out of cabbage, for example, or a breaking bone out of breaking celery. And we kind of believe it because there's that cross-modality and there's those visuals kind of reassuring us of that. Nevertheless, this idea of causal listening also suggests a kind of a listening out for information or for particular behavior. I'm going to play two very short recordings of the same mug being poured water at different temperatures. That's number one, and that's number two. So who thinks the first one is cold? Yes? Okay, so it seems to be a consensus. So that's a funny thing to think of. Why on hell have we developed these skills to even kind of identify different temperatures through sound alone? One of my PhD students at SARC, Lara Weaver, is conducting a project between creative practice and sound and music, environmental sciences and environmental humanities, focusing on peatlands in Ireland. She's engaging with the effects of climate change from a multitude of perspectives. The peatland sonic environment represents a point of access to listening to its present condition, but also to imagine its past and future based on data sets measuring water levels over hundreds of years. The wetness of the peatlands is clearly audible as the unstable ground constantly moves and reacts to movement, causing the underground waterbeds to be in constant activity. The data sets reveal a dramatic drop in water levels caused by climate change and human intervention. Lara's sound work, Unearth, marks a point in time in the sound of the peatlands, but invites the listener to hear past a soundscape and hear forward into the future, one of peatlands that will eventually dry up. I'm going to play just a minute or so of the opening of the piece, which shifts from an overground perspective of the soundscape to an underground water perspective using hydrophones. So the sound of this kind of underwater, under bog ebullition is kind of putting a stethoscope into this environment, and through sound alone getting a sense of how healthy or otherwise it is. And I'm going to get into the last section of the talk, kind of framed by this quote which I keep kind of coming back to by Veit Earlman. In an article called "But What the Ethnographic Year," and he asks, are there ways of documenting, analyzing and interpreting sound as they arise, fade away and rebound like echoes in the canyon? We tend to think of sound as a thing, you know, the sound of water, the sound of a bottle, the sound of a glass, whereas in fact it's a little bit more kind of complicated with that, and we're very attuned to where sounds come from, how they fade in, how they fade away, how they resound, and we get to recognize these kind of wider properties of sound, both in time and in space. And this has become kind of a critical element at some of the work that I've been doing on the more ethnographic, if you like, social engaged arts practice side of what I kind of get up to. And a lot of this work has happened in Rio, in Brazil, in a set of favelas of slum towns called Maré, in the north of the city. 140,000 inhabitants, several iterations of violence and conflict between drug gangs, controlling territory, internal politics, and then occupations, invasions, pacifications, whatever you want to call it, by the police, the special forces, and more recently the army in 2014, gaining temporary control of the territory. So separations between humans and environments not only lead to crises conventionally thought of as environmental, but also human crises like famine, often linked directly to environmental disasters and indeed conflict. Like all areas of human experience, conflict is filled with disciplines. There are peace studies, there are conflict transformation studies, there's the law, and so on, international relations, one could go on. It is, however, the concern of anyone with social responsibility and anyone concerned with social justice. In a project entitled Sounding Conflict, which is just coming to an end, we put together an interdisciplinary team of researchers from sound studies, anthropology, political science, drama studies, and musicology. And we partner with NGOs in community music, theatre, and participatory sonic arts, doing field work in Middle East, Northern Ireland, and Brazil, to try and understand what a sound experience is in a conflict situation of different stages, including post-conflict. We framed our work under four R words, for better or for worse: resistance, resilience, reconciliation, and remediation. And after 4 years of, well, 3.5 years of field work, one of my tasks was to create an artwork that would draw insights from different bits of field work conducted by different people, sometimes with a purely kind of ethnographic lenses, sometimes anthropological, sometimes social science, more broadly social science or political sciences. This resulted in a piece called Sounding Conflict, a performance in 5 acts, in collaboration with a theatre company called Tinderbox and with the sound artist Matilde Meirelles. Drawing from various interviews, we arrived at the notion of the wall and the brick as a metaphor for kind of structuring the entire piece, which became a film performance and an installation and a live performance. The wall and its susceptibility for destruction, constant restructuring and rebuilding. The brick as a modular element imbuing the sound world and dramaturgy with multiple meanings. The notion of the performative gesture of the brick stands for wall, that might be divide a community, but also it's the wall that makes a home or a city. It acts as a protector, oppressor, divider. David Novak and Matt Sakokini say, sound resides in this feedback loop of materiality and metaphor, infusing words with a diverse spectrum of meaning and interpretations. To engage sound as the interrelation of materiality and metaphor is to show how deeply and apparently separate fields of perception and discourse are intertwined in everyday experiences and understandings of sound. So I would like to finish by playing an excerpt from the performance. And these are some images. The performance is shown as a projected installation with live interventions by local actors, if you like. So this is actually on in Rio at the moment. It's opening in Viseu, not far from here, tomorrow. And these ideas of the wall as border, as protection, and as part of what it is to make a city gets reinterpreted and remediated, if you like, through various performances, various iterations. This is a little bright to see this in here, but this is an example of the projected performance and live performance kind of in dialogue, in which the notion of the wall means very different things. So in Maré, the wall is invisible. It's an invisible wall between two drug gangs that control 2 parts of the territory. And I'm going to finish by playing the end of that work, which draws on hip hop, hip-hop being one of the common threads in sound and music that we found through fieldwork in Syrian refugees camps in the Middle East, to Ireland, to Brazil. And with all its kind of common musical languages, of course, immense variations that are regional and local. And in contexts like this, there's an acting out of very often resilience and resistance through the music itself. In this Syrian refugee camps, one of the first bits of infrastructure, if you like, that emerged was a little booth, a sound booth, and the microphone to record, to rap and to record hip hop. So this last scene of the film kind of reflects on that, with sounds that were heard, I guess, through all the participants, that were recollated and reworked into this kind of performative act. We ended with an archive recording of riots in Belfast in 1979. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Pedro. And so we'd like to open the session for questions, if you have. We have also possibly some questions online. We don't have. So, if you have any questions, sorry, if you have any questions for Pedro Rebelo.
Eu vou dirigir a tudo.
Ok, claro.
Parabéns, gostei muito da sua comunicação, principalmente parabéns pelo seu trabalho.
Obrigado.
A parte sonora, as instalações, achei muito interessante o trabalho que está a fazer. A minha questão tem a ver mais com a parte introdutória a nível metodológico, na questão de classificações, da parte da disciplina e da disciplina, portanto, da não disciplina, não é? Portanto, apercebi-me que apresentou uma série de categorizações e deu como exemplo a parte das categorias, que é uma parte sistemática, muito típica de finais do século XIX e inícios do século XX, quando várias disciplinas se institucionalizam na academia. E não pude deixar de me lembrar que Orden Alzates, ao mesmo tempo que faziam a sua classificação de instrumentos musicais, trabalhavam também no arquivo sonoro, não é? E ainda hoje, no INET, na Nova, eu ouço falar o primeiro grande projeto era a Enciclopédia de Música no século XX, que já aconteceu, e às vezes ainda ouço falar colegas nos corredores da questão dos arquivos sonoros. De certa maneira, eu gostava de lhe perguntar, afinal, não percebi muito bem qual é a sua posição, se assume um pouco a questão do cuidado da categorização ou se rompe com ele, porque no fundo eu acabei por ver, por certo, também uma certa categorização sonora quando mostra som com chávena, som da água a cair em chávena quente, som da água a cair em chávena fria, o ruído assim. Portanto, no fundo, assume uma certa categorização e eu acabei por não compreender muito bem se a assumo ou se rompe com ela. Era mais essa a minha questão.
Fala em português? Talvez. Sim? Talvez. Sim, é uma ótima pergunta. E eu acho que o que estes trabalhos tendem a questionar quando são apresentados, não em situações nestas, mas num contexto de expositivo, ou de performance, ou de galeria, é precisamente questionar isso. Portanto, é a nossa a categorização da chave da água quente ou fria, somos nós que a estamos a fazer, não é? Portanto, ela existe de um ponto de vista perceptual. Agora, ela pode ser repensada. Portanto, este exemplo foi um exemplo tipo de classe de aula, não é? Tirado fora do contexto. Agora, estes helicópteros que aparecem nestas peças podem ser helicópteros de paz, como podem ser helicópteros de opressão, não é? Portanto, isso depende muito do contexto. O som do helicóptero é mais ou menos o mesmo. E nós estamos habituados, porque o cinema tem tanta influência na nossa percepção sonora, nós estamos habituados a isto é o som desta arma, isto é o som deste avião ou deste helicóptero, enquanto, na verdade, é tudo muito contextualizado e depende não só do som propriamente dito, do que é que está a fazer o som, mas de como é que o som é transformado pelo espaço. Portanto, muitos destes participantes nos falam de aprender a ouvir de onde é que vem o tiroteio para ver se é seguro passar por esta rua ou não. Não é? Portanto, estas categorizações estão a ser feitas dependendo do local, não é? Isso é uma questão interessante. E só abrindo os nossos ouvidos, digamos, essas categorizações e falando com pessoas que estão nestas situações, é que podemos começar a entender como é que isso é feito.
O que me estava a ocorrer era que, por exemplo, à época, o que me parece um pouco é que mudou a questão dos interesses de categorização, porque à época, por exemplo, a nossa Alzates era a questão muito do mundo extra-europeu.
Claro.
Do universo sonoro que estava no extra-Europa e que estava a ser descoberto e catalogado e tudo. E aqui parece um pouco que mudam, obviamente, mudam-se os tempos, mudam-se as vontades e passámos muito para a questão agora do social, dos tempos de guerra, mais de contextos sonoros, mas no fundo é interessante ver que muda-se o ponto catalogador, mas continua-se a hierarquizar e a fazer distinção. Era essa a minha questão.
Sim. Obrigado.
Se há mais alguma questão?
Só para complementar, bom dia. Eu vivia no Rio de Janeiro e esse som do helicóptero é muito presente. Dá medo.
Sim.
Na cidade, de repente, do nada, aparece os helicópteros, a gente já sabe que a polícia está
Sim.
voando nos morros, vai ter tiroteio, vai ter... E isso me remeteu a uma memória desagradável. Eu não tinha me dado conta desse som mesmo, que faz parte.
Sim.
Acho que foi bem apropriado.
Obrigado. Sim.
Se há mais alguma questão? Okay. Eu gostava só de colocar, eu tenho várias questões, não as vou pôr aqui, mas gostava só de fazer talvez duas, mas talvez começando por uma digamos, uma montante e a outra é mais ajusante. Ou seja, em termos de, por um lado, dos projetos que estes que mostraste e outros que tens. Em nível do impacto, por um lado, da consciência para o som e, por outro lado, pelo efeito da integração nas comunidades em que interviram. E podias falar um bocadinho do efeito na comunidade, qual foi o impacto e se o nível de consciência para o som se foi, digamos, pontual para aquela experiência, ou se há um nível de consciência, digamos, a crescer em cada intervenção que fazes.
Sim, eu queria começar por situar que o impacto é mínimo, porque a escala disto é minúscula, não é? Portanto, não há aqui romanticismos nem ilusões que isto está a fazer alguma coisa. Agora, o que descala, não é? Portanto, estamos a falar de pequenos grupos de pessoas em que estamos a testar metodologias e estamos a criar situações que, se não fossem estes projetos, não aconteceriam. Portanto, isso já muda um pouco a alteração. Não tive tempo de falar, há um grande problema de artistas chegarem numa situação, paraquedas, e fazerem uma coisa e depois vão-se embora para outra situação, e todos nós temos culpa disso em vários graus, não é? Portanto, acho que é preciso ter cuidado com isso. Eu tenho tido a sorte de, na Maré, ter trabalhado muito regularmente desde 2014, o que me tem dado a oportunidade de revisitar e falar sempre com as pessoas e estar a ver como a situação muda lá, não é? Aparecem reflexões de participantes, como esta que está aqui, não vou agora ler, em que veem estes projetos como mais uma forma de ter um olhar crítico sobre a vivência do dia-a-dia, sobre a sua politização, digamos, e, de alguma forma, este foco no som. Um dos comentários que me tocou foi uma das pessoas um dos participantes a dizer: pobre não tem tempo para ouvir, pobre não tem tempo para refletir. Portanto, isso é coisa para a gente fazer nestas salas, não é? E estes projetos às vezes dão um enquadramento em que isso é permitido, e é permitido tempo para passar a fazer algo que normalmente seria visto como um luxo, ou nem sequer algo que deveria ser atividade. Portanto, são estes impactos pequenos a nível pessoal, ou do grupo pessoal, ou da comunidade, que esses sim acho que são evidentes. E é isso, e temos tido a preocupação de não medir do ponto de vista científico o que é o impacto, mas estar sempre a ouvir quais são as consequências destes projetos que são feitos.
Sim, a minha pergunta tinha mesmo a ver com a experiência que as pessoas integram e o impacto que pode ser, não é tanto uma questão quantitativa, pelo menos na minha pergunta, é mesmo uma questão da consciência para o som, que é algo que eu acho que, se calhar estou assim um bocadinho ambicioso, mas tenho dito que me parece que está a aumentar, a crescer mesmo a nível da arquitetura e assim. E que no caso do trabalho com o som como significado e como algo atuante, não é tanto pela quantidade, mas é pelo impacto que lá está, o tempo que permite a essas pessoas. Só mais uma coisa, entretanto reparei que fui para o português, por isso vou agora passar para o inglês novamente. So one last question, I don't know if meanwhile we have other questions? So my last one is because of the multidisciplinary nature of these projects, I would ask in a very quick response, if you may, which kind of communities right now, in terms of starting from the undisciplinary idea, how many of the participants that come from a musical background come from a musical already, let's say, broadened by its sound, or come from a traditional music background, in which are the shifts that they go through?
So that's a very big question. But I'm going to just say one thing. I think sound has become a thing in humanities and the sciences. That wasn't a thing 15 years ago. And there's sound studies as a discipline that has establish itself with people that come from music, from sound, and others that don't come from those areas. And I think this is, it's rich. It's at the same time important not to ignore the hundreds of years of tradition that music as a kind of a privileged access to sound things has, and things like instrument categorization and musicology and history of music. It's, you know, it's kind of part of that tradition. But I think it's rich that there are different languages and vocabularies emerging to talk about sound and the sound experience that is also separate from a musical one. So I think, and this has become very evident when you put a group of researchers in the room and come from different backgrounds, and a given discipline has a kind of an understanding of what it is and what things like, even what field work means in anthropology and in social engaged art is a different thing. So that dialogue is important, and this kind of undisciplining, I think, is a way of facilitating that dialogue.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.